Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Alexandra Guironnet from RTE. I work as a developer on OperatorFabric, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity today to give you a quick idea of what OperatorFabric is about and where it comes from. But if this gets you interested, please do join us at the demo, like Guironnet said, for the full picture. So the first thing that I should start with is probably that OperatorFabric started out as part of an RT project to help operators run the French electricity transport network. But the interesting part is that it became a project of its own and was open source precisely when people started to realize that actually most of the concerns that OperatorFabric was addressing were actually relevant to other projects in RTE and even outside the company and even outside the energy sector. So that's why today I'll try and not focus too much on the RT use case and use a pretty abstract vocabulary. So this, I hope, lets you imagine how you could use OperatorFabric, because that's what we're interested in. So first, I'd like to start by setting the scene for our story. The first thing that you need in order for OperatorFabric to deliver value in your context is you need to have a pretty complex system, or even a system of systems, like Benoit mentioned in the architecture talk yesterday. And it's even better if your systems is actually spanning several responsibility zones. These zones can be geographical or technical divisions. For example, if you have a common system overlaying the high power line system. And you have operators that are in charge, or teams of operators that are in charge of a given zone. But also, and that's where it gets interesting, because the system is interconnected as a group, all operators are also responsible for the stability and security of the system as a whole. So, sounds familiar? It should. So what we see usually happening in this kind of context, and at least it's the case in the RT use case, is that a lot of tools are developed to help the operators with this pretty difficult job. So, for example, you have a lot of monitoring of the system. You have simulations to try and figure out how the system will behave given a set of conditions to try to anticipate what might go wrong. And what we see is that over the years, these tools are actually getting much better. For example, the monitoring is getting more accurate. More parts of the system can be monitored. The simulations are getting more accurate too. They can be run more quickly because they're quicker, obviously. So I meant that they can be run more often because they're quicker. And that's all really great. But quite often what we see is that we end up with this, which means that the operator has to look at maybe 10 different screens because he's watching out for alerts in one screen, then he's going to another screen to run simulations, then sifting through the results to see what he's interested in, then going into another application to act on the network, and that's not very efficient. So actually we see that the sheer amount of data that's now available to the operators is more overwhelming than empowering to them. So it's really a pity because our tools are getting better, but we're really not leveraging the full power of these tools. So how can OperatorFabric help? Because from what I just said, clearly adding yet another tool to an already bursting toolbox doesn't really seem like a great idea. The thing is that, in my opinion, OperatorFabric is not going to be just any tool. It's going to act kind of as a Swiss Army knife, because what we plan to do is aggregate all the applications that the operator is using into one screen. We're not going to do that by writing very small and stuffing everything together in one screen. The idea is that we're going to give him or her just the right amount of information at the right time, using, it's going to look like this. he or she is going to get notifications that are ordered based on the severity of the alerts. And when they click on the notification, they'll get this, what we call the detail tab, that's presenting just the right amount of data, just the data that I'm interested in to make my decision. And then I can click the buttons to make my decisions, and this will go back to the main application. So yes, that's why I call it a Swiss Army knife, because the aim with this is that OperatorFabric, like a Swiss Army knife, is something that's handier to carry around than my full toolbox, but and it lets me do most of the things that I need to do on a daily basis. But of course, if I need to take something apart, I'll still go and fetch my full toolbox. And that's how we hope it's going to be for the operators. They're going to be able to do most of the things, most of their tasks through OperatorFabric, but they can still go back to the main applications if they need to do something more precise. And the other reason why we're not going to do away with the toolbox is that we're actually building upon it, because as Benoit said yesterday, there's no point in recreating something that already exists and already works fine. Because we don't have, there's one last thing that I wanted to say, is that I think what we're trying to do here with OperatorFabric is that we're really trying to take away from the operator everything that we can, so that in the end they can focus on the rest, which is what only they can do and what their training is useful for, which is, in RT's case, making the right decision on the network. And I think there's real value in this, because again, if there's no point in having really good tools if you're not, if their output is not usable by a human, if it's too complicated to use. And my first job was actually in business intelligence, making dashboards out of different data sources for people to make decisions. And in the beginning, I have to admit I was quite peeved, because, well, I felt we were not bringing any value, we're not adding anything new, and let's face it, the math that we were doing was not exactly rocket science. So I felt, well, what's the point? But then project after project, I realized that just as the dashboard is useless without the underlying applications, well, these applications couldn't be used by the people in charge without this upper layer. So that's why I think it's important. So yeah, because we don't have much time, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the themes that OperatorFabric is going to deal with. We've already talked quite a bit, well, I talked at least, about complexity and data. And the other 3 points that I'd like to focus on are cooperation, shared responsibility, and auditing. Because as we said earlier, the system is interconnected, so quite often any action that I want to do, even if it's in my zone of responsibility, means that I'll need to coordinate with people from other zones. And right now, at least in RTE, this happens mostly through emails and phone calls, and we found that it's not very efficient and not very reliable. For example, in terms of crisis management, what happens if I don't know who's on call tonight? That could be a problem. And also, you can't really look back on what happened. For example, if you want to look back and understand why a certain decision was made, you can't. Well, we can't really, unless you're going to go through all the emails. And if you want maybe to look at your processes and find the performance bottlenecks in your processes, that's something that's very difficult to do in the current state of things. And finally, OperatorFabric is going to help with processes, automation, and I'm not going to say this last one, but playing with many different technologies. Because, for example, all of the workflows that Anne presented a few minutes ago, depending on the companies or depending on the teams, they might be done either in a completely automated way, or they might be done by hand. And it will still be nice to be able to have a view of all these processes in one screen, without having it, in one screen. That's what OperatorFabric is going to offer, and we're going to be able to operate with all kinds of technologies, even proprietary software, sorry. So that's another point of value in OperatorFabric, I think. So, right, how is that possible? How does it work? Because so far we've mostly talked about how OperatorFabric was going to be useful to the end user, but we wanted to make things easier for the IT people too, because we're IT people. Well, the thing is that if I have two applications that need to push contents to OperatorFabric, so we call them third-party applications, and one could be an application built on Possible, for example, that's running calculation and simulations and pushing the results to OperatorFabric. We're trying to make that very easy and to involve as little code as possible in the underlying, in the third-party applications. And we also wanted to make sure that we weren't making strong hypotheses on the technologies. So the way it's currently done is that any application that wants to push content to OperatorFabric needs to provide what we call a configuration bundle, which is basically just a set of flat files that is describing to OperatorFabric what your processes are. Like I have a step 1, I want to input a file. Step 2, I'm checking, making checks upon it, etc. And how you want the cards to be rendered, so handlebars, templates, and CSS files. And then once you've done that, you can just push cards as raw data. They're just plain JSON. And all this is done through a REST API. And then OperatorFabric will take care of the rendering of the cards and the routing of the card to the appropriate people. And once this is done, you'll get your notification feed, and the user will be able to, again, get just the right, just the data that you want him or her to see, and be provided with buttons or any type of input to be able to act on the card. Our plan is also for the user to be able to maybe kind of forward the card to another user if for some reason they're not able to handle the card directly. And that will probably be very useful for the coordination use cases. I'm not going to go into detail into our technology stack and CI pipeline. I just wanted to show that we're using mostly we're using open source technologies, and they're quite state-of-the-art technologies. And I just wanted to say a word about Spring, because we rely quite heavily on the Spring framework. And we also try to follow the same philosophy, meaning that in OperatorFabric we tried to provide a lot of default configuration that we felt were sensible to get you up and running quickly. But then everything's highly configurable to fit your need as precisely as possible. So in the next episodes, I won't go into too much details here, but about the status of the project, I think compared to Possible, we're kind of still a baby project, because we don't have outside contributors yet, so we would really like to have outside contributors, and also feedback on the current state of things. And also something that would really help us is to have other use cases for OperatorFabric to make sure that we're really going in a direction that's not just for the RT use cases, but that can be useful to anyone. So please do join us during the demo bazaar and give us some feedback, and contact us on Spectrum or GitHub. Just a word about Spectrum, it's brand new, so it's empty because we just transitioned from Mattermost, so the community is not dead. We just switched tools. Thank you.